Mary's pot slipped from her hands, landing with a dull thud at her feet. She stared, her lips trembling as the figure continued. "You have found favor with the Most High," it said. "You will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be Emmanuel. He will be great and will save many." Hi, beautiful people. Thank you for watching Folktales by Promise. Please remember to like, share, and leave a comment below to encourage me. Also, do not forget to subscribe to my channel. The sun dipped low over the sleepy village of Nazareth, casting long shadows across the red earth paths that meandered through clusters of thatched huts. In the distance, the sound of pounding yam mixed with the faint hum of evening conversation. Mary, a soft-spoken young woman with a serene presence, walked purposefully along the path toward the village well. Balanced on her head was a large clay pot, its smooth surface gleaming in the fading light. "Mary," called Abigail, her best friend, skipping to catch up with her. Abigail, with her quick wit and endless chatter, had a way of filling the air with her infectious energy. Behind them trailed Ruth, the quiet and reflective one of their group, her hands carefully clutching a small basket of fruit for their evening meal. "Are you thinking about Joseph again?" Abigail teased, her voice lilting with amusement. "Everyone knows he can't stop talking about you." Mary's cheeks turned a delicate shade of pink. "I was just thinking about tomorrow's chores," she replied softly, her gaze fixed ahead. "You're always so serious." Abigail laughed, spinning around to face her friend. "If I were you, I'd be floating on air. Joseph is the most handsome and kind-hearted man in this village." Mary smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Lately her heart had been heavy, weighed down by something she couldn't quite name. Last night, a vivid dream had disturbed her sleep. A glowing figure had appeared, its voice like the wind through the trees, telling her of a divine purpose. The well came into view, surrounded by the bustle of evening activity. Women gossiped as they filled their pots, and children laughed as they chased each other through the dust. As Mary bent to lower her pot into the water, a sudden stillness fell over the scene. She straightened slowly, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. Before her stood a figure, radiant and otherworldly, cloaked in shimmering light. Mary's breath caught in her throat. Abigail and Ruth continued chattering, oblivious to the being that seemed to fill the entire space. "Mary," the figure spoke, its voice both gentle and commanding. "Do not be afraid." Mary's pot slipped from her hands, landing with a dull thud at her feet. She stared, her lips trembling as the figure continued. "You have found favor with the Most High," it said. "You will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be Emmanuel. He will be great and will save many." Tears sprang to Mary's eyes. "But how can this be?" she whispered. "I am not yet married." "The Spirit will come upon you," the figure said, "and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Your child will be holy, the Son of God. And your cousin Elizabeth, though barren and in her old age, is also with child." As suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The noise of the village returned, and Mary found herself gripping the edge of the well for support. "Mary, what's wrong?" Ruth asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "You're pale as a ghost." I I just need a moment," Mary murmured. She straightened, forcing a smile. "Let's go home." Joseph leaned against the wooden frame of his workshop, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The evening breeze carried the scent of freshly carved cedar, and he inhaled deeply, finding solace in his work. Beside him sat Daniel, his childhood friend and confidant, who was busy shaping a small wooden figurine. "So," Daniel said, his voice laced with mischief. When are you going to tell Mary how nervous she makes you? Or should I do it for you? Joseph chuckled, shaking his head. It's not nerves. I just want to do things right. Mary deserves the best. And she's getting the best, Daniel replied. You're the most decent man in this village. Just don't forget to tell her how you feel. Joseph was about to reply when he saw Mary approaching, her pace unusually slow. He straightened, his heart quickening. Something was different about her. There was a gravity in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Joseph, she said softly, stopping a few paces away, I need to speak with you. Daniel glanced between them, sensing the seriousness of the moment. I'll leave you two alone, he said, standing and brushing sawdust off his hands. As Daniel walked away, Mary stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Joseph, she began, her voice trembling, I have something to tell you, but I don't know if you'll believe me. Joseph reached out and gently touched her shoulder. You can tell me anything. Mary took a deep breath and recounted her encounter with the angel, her words tumbling out in a rush. Joseph listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each sentence. When she finished, there was a long silence. You're saying you're with child? He asked finally, his voice quiet. Yes, Mary whispered, but this child is from God. Joseph turned away, his mind racing. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of her words felt too great to bear. He had always known Mary to be honest and pure, but this, how could it be true? I need time to think, he said at last, his voice heavy. Without another word, he walked away, leaving Mary standing alone under the gathering twilight. That night, Joseph tossed and turned on his small wooden bed. His mind was a storm of doubt, hurt, and confusion. Mary's words echoed relentlessly in his ears. The woman he loved, the one he trusted more than anyone, had told him something impossible. How could she bear a child and yet claim it was from God? As the moonlight crept through the window slats, Joseph finally drifted into a restless sleep. In his dreams, a figure of brilliant light appeared, filling the room with a warmth that seemed to quiet his troubled soul. Joseph, son of David, the voice called, gentle but firm. Do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall name him Emmanuel, for he will save his people from their sins. Joseph's heart swelled as the figure reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. A peace he hadn't known before washed over him, and as quickly as the figure appeared, it vanished, leaving him with a sense of resolve. He woke with the sunrise, the dream vivid in his mind. His doubts melted away like the morning mist. He hurried to Mary's family home, his steps quick and purposeful. When Mary opened the door, her face was pale and her eyes red from a sleepless night of tears. Joseph took her hands, looking into her eyes with a newfound certainty. I believe you, he said simply. Mary's lip quivered as relief swept over her. You do? Yes, Joseph said, pulling her into a gentle embrace. We'll face this together. I don't understand it all, but I know God is in this. Mary decided to visit her cousin Elizabeth, just as the angel had mentioned. Joseph insisted on arranging safe passage for her, and Daniel volunteered to accompany her partway. Elizabeth and her husband Zachariah lived in a nearby village surrounded by rolling hills and lush farmlands. Their modest home was a beacon of hospitality, always filled with the warmth of Elizabeth's laughter. When Mary arrived, Elizabeth was outside, gathering herbs from her garden. Her face lit up the moment she saw her younger cousin. She hurried forward, her arms open wide. Mary! she cried, pulling her into a hug. As soon as their embrace ended, Elizabeth stepped back, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "O Mary, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you carry. How is it that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" Mary's eyes widened in shock. "How do you know?" Elizabeth smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "The moment you greeted me, the baby within me leaped for joy. The Spirit told me everything." Mary sank to her knees, overcome with emotion. "God is so good," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He has looked upon me, his humble servant, and done great things." Elizabeth helped Mary to her feet, guiding her into the house. Over the next few weeks, Mary stayed with Elizabeth, learning from her wisdom and finding solace in her cousin's unwavering faith. The time came for Joseph and Mary to travel to Bethlehem for the census. It was a journey neither of them looked forward to, but Joseph knew he had to comply with the decree. Daniel, ever the loyal friend, helped prepare their supplies, securing a sturdy donkey for Mary to ride. The path to Bethlehem was long and treacherous, winding through dense forests and arid plains. They passed bustling markets and quiet villages, the hum of life around them contrasting sharply with their quiet determination. As they camped under the stars one night, Joseph looked over at Mary, who sat wrapped in a shawl, her hands resting on her growing belly. "Do you ever wonder why God chose us?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Mary smiled softly. "Every day, but I trust he has a plan." Joseph nodded, the firelight casting shadows on his face. "I'll do everything I can to protect you and the child. I promise." When they arrived in Bethlehem, the town was teeming with travelers. Every inn and lodging was full. Joseph knocked on door after door, but the answer was always the same: no room. Finally, a kind innkeeper took pity on them. "I have no space in the house," he said, "but you can stay in the stable. It's not much, but it will keep you safe and warm." Joseph helped Mary settle into the humble shelter, the scent of hay and animals filling the air. As night fell, Mary's labor pains began. Joseph's heart pounded as he scrambled to help her, his inexperience and fear evident. Then, as the first cries of their newborn son filled the stable, Joseph's fear turned to awe. Mary held the child close, tears streaming down her face. "He is beautiful," she whispered. Joseph leaned closer, his voice trembling with emotion. "Welcome to the world, Emmanuel." In the fields outside Bethlehem, a group of shepherds tended their flocks. The night was quiet until a brilliant light split the darkness. An angel appeared, and the shepherds fell to their knees, shielding their eyes. "Do not be afraid," the angel said. "I bring you good news of great joy. Today, in the town of Bethlehem, a Savior has been born. You will find him wrapped in cloth and lying in a manger." The light grew brighter as a heavenly host appeared, singing praises to God. When the angels departed, the shepherds hurried into town, their excitement palpable. They found the stable and knelt before the child, their rough hands trembling as they offered humble gifts: a jug of milk, a blanket woven from sheep's wool, and a small wooden carving. "Thank you for allowing us to see him," one of the shepherds said, his voice thick with emotion. Mary smiled. "It is we who are blessed by your faith." Far from Bethlehem, in a bustling city filled with traders and scholars, three wise men studied the stars. These were not ordinary men. They were learned astrologers and philosophers, revered for their knowledge of the heavens and the mysteries of life. Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar had seen an extraordinary star, a bright and steady light, unlike anything they had ever encountered. "This star speaks of a king," Balthazar said, his voice laced with awe. Melchior nodded. A king not born of ordinary men, but one sent from the heavens. Gaspar, the youngest, spoke with conviction. We must find him and pay homage. The three wise men gathered their treasures, gold, frankincense, and more, and began their journey, guided by the radiant star. Their caravan wound through deserts and valleys, crossing rivers and towns, their resolve unwavering. News of the wise men's journey reached King Herod, a ruler known for his paranoia and cruelty. Sitting on his gilded throne, he summoned the travelers to his court. "What is this about a new king?" Herod demanded, his tone icy. The wise men explained the prophecy and the star, unaware of Herod's dark intentions. Feigning interest, Herod urged them, "Go and find this child. When you do, report back to me, so I too may worship him." The wise men bowed and departed. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the star rested over a humble stable. The sight puzzled them. They had expected a grand palace, but they trusted the star's guidance. Inside, they found Mary and Joseph with the child. The wise men knelt, their elaborate robes pulling around them as they offered their gifts. "This gold is for the King of Kings," Balthazar said, placing a shining pouch before the child. Melchior added, "This frankincense is for the divine, a symbol of prayers rising to heaven." Gaspar bowed low. "And this myrrh, to signify the sacrifice he will make for humanity." Mary and Joseph watched in wonder as these strangers honored their son with such reverence. But that night they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod. Instead, they left for their homeland by another route, leaving Herod seething with rage. Enraged by their defiance, Herod issued a chilling decree: kill every male child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and its surrounding areas. As Herod's soldiers prepared to carry out the decree, Joseph was visited by an angel in a dream. "Get up," the angel said urgently. "Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is searching for the child to kill him." Joseph woke in a cold sweat and quickly roused Mary. "We have to leave now," he said, his voice shaking. With haste, they packed what little they had. Mary carried the baby close to her chest, while Joseph led the donkey through the darkened streets, their footsteps muffled by the night. The journey to Egypt was grueling. They traveled through arid landscapes, relying on the kindness of strangers and their faith to sustain them. Joseph worked tirelessly along the way, offering his carpentry skills in exchange for food and shelter. Finally, they reached the bustling markets and lush fields of Egypt, finding refuge in a small community of exiles. Here they were safe, but the weight of what they had left behind never left them. The atmosphere in King Herod's palace was tense. His advisors stood in uneasy silence, their eyes darting nervously as the king paced back and forth across the ornate marble floor. His robe swept behind him like storm clouds, and his face was twisted with fury. "They think they can't defy me!" Herod roared, slamming his fist onto the gilded armrest of his throne. "This so-called king they seek threatens everything I have built. I will not allow it." The advisors exchanged anxious glances, unsure of how to calm their ruler. Herod's paranoia had grown in recent years, and his ruthlessness was well known. Even his family was not safe from his wrath, with stories of relatives executed on mere suspicion. "Send out my soldiers," Herod barked, his voice echoing through the hall. "Every male child under 2 years old in Bethlehem and the surrounding districts must be eliminated. Spare no one." The advisors hesitated. One finally stepped forward, his voice trembling. My lord, such an order will bring great sorrow to the people. Perhaps. Herod cut him off with a glare that could freeze a flame. Are you questioning my command? No, my lord, the adviser stammered, bowing deeply. It shall be done. The following morning, the king's decree spread like wildfire. Soldiers clad in gleaming armor mounted their horses, their swords sharpened and ready. They rode in formation, a grim procession that sent waves of terror through the villages they passed. In Bethlehem, the peaceful hum of daily life was shattered by the sound of galloping hooves. Mothers clutched their children, fathers barred doors, and elders prayed fervently, hoping for a miracle. The soldiers began their search methodically, breaking into homes and dragging out families. Cries filled the air as infants were torn from their mothers' arms. Fathers who resisted were struck down without mercy. It was a scene of chaos and despair. One young mother, Miriam, clung desperately to her son as two soldiers stormed into her home. Please, she sobbed, shielding the boy with her body. He's all I have. The soldiers exchanged a look, their faces hard and unyielding. One of them muttered, "We are just following orders." Miriam screamed as they pulled her son away, her cries echoing through the streets. The soldiers moved on, leaving shattered families in their wake. In the hills outside Bethlehem, Zachariah and Elizabeth were well aware of the king's wrath. Since the birth of their son John, they had lived in fear, knowing that his very existence was a miracle and thus a potential target. The angel's words to Zachariah on the day of John's birth echoed in his mind. This child will prepare the way for the Lord. Zachariah had taken no chances. When news of Herod's decree reached their ears, he and Elizabeth acted swiftly. Wrapping John in a blanket, they fled to a hidden cave deep in the hills. It was a cold, damp shelter, but it was their only hope. Elizabeth rocked John gently, her tears mingling with the dirt on her cheeks. "How long can we stay here?" she whispered. "As long as it takes," Zachariah replied, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "We must trust in God's protection." They were not alone. Other families had also sought refuge in the hills, forming a quiet community of survivors. They shared what little food and water they had, their unity a small beacon of hope in the shadow of Herod's tyranny. Back in Bethlehem, the once lively village was a ghost of its former self. The streets were silent except for the anguished cries of mothers mourning their lost sons. Grandmothers sat in doorways, their faces etched with grief as they rocked back and forth, singing lullabies to the memories of children who would never grow up. One elder, Hannah, stood at the edge of the village well, her hands clasped tightly around her walking stick. She had lost three grandsons to the massacre, and her heart felt as though it had been ripped from her chest. But her voice rang out with defiance as she addressed a small crowd of women. "They may take our children," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But they will never take our faith. We will not forget their names, and we will not let Herod's cruelty break us." Her words brought some comfort to the grieving mothers who clung to each other for strength. In his palace, Herod sat alone in his chamber, the flickering light of the oil lamps casting shadows on the walls. He sipped wine from a jeweled goblet, but it brought him no peace. The cries of the mothers in Bethlehem haunted his dreams, and the weight of his actions pressed heavily on his chest. "Why do I feel this way?" he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "I've done what was necessary to protect my throne." But deep down, he knew he could not silence the whispers of guilt that gnawed at his conscience. Though he had succeeded in spreading terror, he had not found the child he sought. In the aftermath of the massacre, Bethlehem began to rebuild, though the scars of Herod's wrath remained. Families clung to their faith, finding solace in their belief that the Messiah would still come to deliver them from such tyranny. Elizabeth and Zachariah returned to their home once it was safe, cradling their precious son and thanking God for his protection. Their joy was bittersweet as they mourned the loss of so many other children, but they vowed to raise John to be a beacon of hope. Though Herod's decree had left a trail of heartbreak, the prophecy of a savior remained unbroken. The people's face, though shaken, endured, like a flame flickering against the wind, but never extinguished. In Egypt, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus built a quiet life. Joseph found work among local craftsmen, his skill quickly earning him respect. Mary cared for Jesus, watching him grow into a curious and thoughtful child. The community embraced them, drawn to the family's humility and kindness. Though far from home, Mary and Joseph found solace in their faith and the knowledge that their son's life was part of a greater plan. The years in Egypt passed slowly for Joseph and Mary. Egypt had become a safe haven, but it never truly felt like home. The bustling cities and foreign customs were a constant reminder that they were strangers in a land not their own. Joseph worked diligently as a carpenter, building furniture and repairing tools for locals to provide for his family. Mary spent her days caring for Jesus, who was growing into a curious and thoughtful child. One night, Joseph was visited again by an angel in a dream. The room seemed to glow with an otherworldly light as the angel spoke. Joseph, son of David, rise and take the child and his mother and return to the land of Israel. Those who sought the child's life are dead. Joseph awoke with a start, his heart pounding. The words of the angel filled him with both relief and apprehension. It was time to go home. The next morning, Joseph shared the dream with Mary. Though her heart longed for home, she looked at Joseph with concern. Are you sure it's safe? The angel's message was clear. Joseph replied, his voice steady. We are to return to Israel. Mary nodded, trusting in Joseph's faith and God's guidance. They began to pack their belongings, a meager collection of tools, clothing, and small mementos from their time in Egypt. The journey back to Israel was long and arduous, but this time it was filled with a sense of hope. They traveled through arid deserts and lush valleys, retracing their steps with a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. Along the way, they encountered travelers who shared stories of Herod's death and the changes in the region. One evening, as they camped under the stars, Jesus sat beside Joseph, watching him carve a piece of wood. Father, Jesus asked, his voice soft but curious, why are we going back? Joseph paused, placing the carving down. He looked into his son's earnest eyes and smiled. Because it is where we belong, and because you have a purpose there, one greater than any of us can imagine. Jesus nodded thoughtfully, his small hands tracing patterns in the sand. When they reached Judea, Joseph learned that Herod's son, Archelaus, was now ruling in his father's place. The news sent a ripple of unease through Joseph. Archelaus was known to be as cruel and oppressive as his father, and Joseph worried that the danger had not entirely passed. One night, as Joseph lay pondering their next steps, he was visited again in a dream. The angel's voice was firm but reassuring. Do not settle in Judea. Go to the district of Galilee. The next morning, Joseph shared the message with Mary. We will go to Nazareth, he said, determination in his voice. It is safer there, and it is where our story began. Returning to Nazareth was bittersweet. The small village nestled among rolling hills looked much as they had left it, but the years away had changed them. Familiar faces greeted them with warmth and curiosity, though whispers of their sudden departure and return lingered in the air. Joseph resumed his carpentry work, his hands steady as he rebuilt the small workshop he had left behind. Mary settled back into the rhythms of village life, tending to their home and watching Jesus grow. Jesus, now a young boy, quickly became a favorite among the village children. He had a quiet wisdom beyond his years, often surprising the elders with his thoughtful questions. He spent hours in the synagogue, listening intently to the teachings and engaging in discussions that left even the most learned teachers amazed. As time passed, Joseph and Mary became pillars of their community. Joseph's work as a carpenter brought stability, and Mary's gentle demeanor earned her the respect of the women in the village. Together, they raised Jesus in a home filled with faith, love, and humility. Though their life in Nazareth was simple, it was rich with purpose. Every day, Joseph marveled at the boy growing under his roof. He would often watch Jesus help with small tasks in the workshop, his small hands mimicking his father's movements with precision and care. One evening, Joseph sat with Mary on the steps of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Do you ever wonder about his future?" he asked. Mary smiled, her eyes fixed on Jesus, who was playing nearby. "Every day, but I trust that God will guide him." One Sabbath, the family traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, a tradition they cherished. The bustling city was alive with pilgrims from across the region, and the temple stood as a beacon of faith and devotion. As they prepared to leave, Mary and Joseph realized that Jesus was not with them. Panic set in as they searched through the crowds, their calls for him swallowed by the noise of the city. After 3 days of frantic searching, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers. His young face was lit with excitement as he asked questions and shared insights that left the elders in awe. "Son," Mary said, rushing to him, her voice a mix of relief and frustration, "why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Jesus looked at her calmly and said, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" Mary and Joseph exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with a mix of wonder and humility. Though they didn't fully understand his words, they knew this moment was a glimpse of the destiny that lay ahead. Life in Nazareth continued, but it was clear that Jesus was no ordinary child. As he grew, his wisdom and compassion became evident to all who met him. Mary treasured these moments in her heart, knowing that one day the quiet life they had built would give way to something far greater. Joseph, too, felt a deep sense of purpose in raising the boy who would one day change the world. Though he didn't know what the future held, he was content to guide and protect his family for as long as he could. Their return to Nazareth marked the beginning of a new chapter, one of preparation, faith, and unwavering trust in the path set before them. The story of Jesus' birth and early years spread far and wide, inspiring hope and faith in countless hearts. For Mary and Joseph, their journey was not without its trials, but their unwavering trust in God carried them through. The humble beginning of their son's life would lay the foundation for a legacy that would change the world forever. Hello, beautiful people. Thank you for your support. Thank you so much for always listening to and watching my stories. Thank you for liking. Thank you for commenting and sharing my stories. Please continue to stick with me. Keep liking, keep sharing, and continue dropping your wonderful comments. Most importantly, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you.